here on the Cover 3 podcast as we continue to get you set for week 2 in the Big Ten. And they don't get much bigger in week 2 than the matchup between Oklahoma and Michigan. Now, the Wolverines have to go on the road to Norman after a 34-17 win against New Mexico. One where, sure, the final margin did not necessarily show a lopsided result, but to my eyes, at least, I thought Bryce Underwood checked a lot of boxes. So did John Mateer. 4 total touchdowns, nearly 400 yards passing. Let's keep it on the quarterbacks right here. Would love to hear from everybody. DK first. How do you see each of these quarterbacks after getting the first look of each of them with their new teams in week 1?
So I thought that John Mateer was I thought we got what we expected. There was more known. I thought he was the best target this offseason in the portal. The fact that he comes in there with Ben Arbuckle as offensive coordinator, I pretty much thought we would get that. Now, on the flip side with Bryce Underwood, I thought they would have run him more. They didn't run him that much. I think you could potentially see that something they were saving possibly for this matchup. You also gave him a ground game that Mateer did not have. So that was a huge luxury piece to have where you were able to get Justice Haynes going. He went for close to $150. That opens up things so much for Bryce Underwood to be more comfortable. But you do want to see, how do you look on that stage? I thought he looked comfortable. I thought he looked poised. But it's going to be a completely different atmosphere. And then kind of the flip side, yes, we got what we wanted out of John Mateer, but the thing that I think was significantly lacking was their inability to run the football. So that to me is, both of these quarterbacks are going to be compared. And I think you could go in and you could potentially see Michigan winning a game without Bryce Underwood lighting it up. But after seeing that first game, I think this puts a lot of pressure on John Mateer to have to deliver against that Michigan defense.
Yeah, Danny, I think both opposing defensive coordinators are probably licking their chops and for different reasons. If you're Oklahoma's DC, you're like, okay, it's Michigan with an offensive line that's questionable, with receivers that don't really scare us all that much, and with a true freshman quarterback who looks like an absolute stud, but he's still a true freshman who just turned 18. Playing Oklahoma in Oklahoma is a little bit different than playing New Mexico. But yeah, if you're a Michigan fan, you were just over the moon about how good Underwood looked and how many different throws he was able to execute. Touch throws, laser throws, stuff on time, throws on the move. We said on this show before, he's not Cam Newton, but he might be like the best, stylistically since Cam, and I think you saw a lot of that. If you're Michigan, you're watching Mateer, you're like, man, this guy makes a lot of plays, but there's also a lot of plays he doesn't see. And can we force this dude to make plays in structure? I bet you Oklahoma's internal grade on Mateer is far lower than what his surface level stats show. Because if you watch the tape and you get the all 22, I know Danny, and we put it in the group chat today, there's a lot of stuff. There's oof, okay. Against a good team, you need to hit this guy. You need to hit this guy on time, and he just never saw it. So, and it would make a dangerous throw into coverage. So, we'll see how much that gets corrected. I think the concerning thing for Oklahoma fans is this is not a new offense for him. Same offensive coordinator came over, Ben Arbuckle, from Washington State to Oklahoma with him. So Mateer should really hit the ground running there as far as seeing guys and hitting them on time. That was a little bit concerning. So I bet you this game maybe a little defensive sided.
We were discussing during the break our fantasy football drafting philosophies, and I take a much more of an analytical, statistical kind of model for the way I do it. And Chip and Danny were talking about how they were very vibes-based with their drafting. John Mateer is very vibes-based when he's playing quarterback. As Bud mentioned, there is a lot of stuff he doesn't see, but he's also able to improvise a lot, keep plays going, extend, and then make them either with his arm or his legs. And that is going to be something that Michigan will be aware of and be game planning around it. Maybe try to keep John Mateer in the pocket. Maybe try to make him make reads and progress, and don't let him scramble and buy time. But the other problem that Oklahoma is facing in here, which you touched on, Danny, Oklahoma's offensive line struggling to get push in the run game against Illinois State, probably not a great sign. I think that Michigan's defensive line might be slightly better than what they saw against the Redbirds last week, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. I wouldn't be surprised if Wink Martindale, the Michigan defensive coordinator, brings a little extra pressure to just get Mateer into making mistakes, because we saw while Mateer was at Washington State last year putting up crazy numbers, when he played better defenses, he was more prone to making mistakes. So that'll be something to watch out for in this one. As far as the Michigan side, I thought the offense was pretty encouraging, what you saw with Bryce Underwood. I am worried about the still seemingly over-reliance on tight ends. The wide receivers were not nearly as prolific in their passing attack last season or last week as their tight ends were. Whether that's just Bryce Underwood's comfortability within the offense and he's still willing to grow in it, I don't know yet. But I do think there were a lot of encouraging signs that you saw from him. You got all the flashes of why he was so highly rated out of high school, but now this is a very different beast because you're not at home against a surprisingly solid New Mexico team anymore. You're on the road against Oklahoma, and for all the problems I think their offense might have, that defense is good, and the defense is very good, and you're going to be playing in a loud, hostile environment, probably nothing like Underwood has seen before. How is he going to handle that?
If you are, so Michigan edge rusher Jayshon Barham had his targeting call upheld by the NCAA, which yuck. Sorry to editorialize. We already discussed this on the Cover 3 podcast on the Instant Reaction Show on Saturday night. So you won't have Barham for the first half. He will be getting in after halftime. For Michigan on the road defensively, Tom, you talk about Wink Martindale. We've lost a lot of the stars from that Michigan defense over the last couple of years. How's that personnel shaping up right now from the same teams that were competing for national titles and even shutting down and taking down the likes of an Ohio State and Alabama at the end of last year?
First of all, let me echo your yuck sentiments because that was a horrible call and it will have an impact on a very important game for Michigan this week because, yeah, there's a lot of inexperience on that defense who is now going to be on the road in a tough environment playing a team that's not as good as that's much better than what they saw last week. So you take Barham out, who is one of the more experienced players in that unit and also one of the more disruptive players on that unit, and you are going to have to figure out a way to replace him. Now, the good news is, if Oklahoma's offensive line struggled against Illinois State, I think that Michigan will still be able to find success without him for a half. But you would like him in there because you want to be playing at peak capacity in a road game like this against a team like this in this kind of spotlight. But I do think the defense should be all right without him for a half as long as he's, once he comes back in the second half. So it will be a very important thing for them to figure out ways to maybe generate or simulate pressure without just a 4 or 3-man rush like they could have possibly done with him. But that'll be up to Wink Martindale, and given his experience and his ability to show that he's done it throughout his career, I'm not that worried.
I would tend to agree with you. I think one of the interesting matchups is Brent Venables taking over the defense for Oklahoma, going against Bryce Underwood. That I think would be a significant advantage in this matchup, similar to what we saw. Now, Matt Patricia, different background, NFL background, but we saw him completely confusing Arch Manning in his first big start on the road. The one big difference is I do think they're going to have to be accountable for Bryce Underwood with his legs. And that's sort of both of these quarterbacks are mobile. If they are confused, they can make something out of nothing. So you might have a great scheme. You might have a rusher get free. You just have to make sure that you stay after him, that your DBs, secondary players are staying with their receivers, or else you could possibly see that. But I'm kind of curious to see that Brent Venables game plan against Bryce Underwood on the road in a hostile environment with a pretty filthy defensive line like our Mason Thomas, Marvin Jones Jr. That, to me, I think is going to be an interesting matchup in itself, too. Oh,
Bud, you're muted.
Did we get him?
Oh, did we get him on
with the mute button.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So looking at this, I think the one advantage Michigan may have is the ability to run the football, right? Whereas we saw Oklahoma not have much of a run game at all. Oklahoma's also playing 2 true freshman starters on the offensive line. So, yeah, Michigan won't have Barham, and that's a huge loss, and that's an absolute nonsense rule. We should just bring back the spearing penalty and let guys play football, especially take out the suspension aspect of it afterwards. But 2 true freshman offensive linemen for Oklahoma, I do think that's something Michigan can probably exploit. And, if you're Oklahoma, if you don't have a run game, you're going to drop Mateer back like 45, 50 times in this game? Like, that's a lot to put on the guys. And I'm curious, how many times can Michigan create free runners at the quarterback by confusing those young offensive linemen for the Sooners?
Something to watch for sure. It's a huge game with big implications for both teams and both conferences. Anytime we get a Big Ten SEC clash, it'll generate a lot of conversation. You can watch that game 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Well, coming up on the other side, a team that the Cover 3 podcast has been extremely dialed in on and very much celebrated. I mean, we are a Luke Altmaier podcast. Luke Altmaier going on the road to take on Manny Diaz's Duke Blue Devils. We'll take you inside that matchup and more next.